Have you ever trusted someone so deeply that you forgot to trust yourself? Have you ever felt that your silence shouted louder than any word you could speak? And if your empathy, the very trait so many admire, was in fact the tool that exposes you most to suffering? Everything that irritates us in others can lead to a deeper understanding of ourselves. Carl Jung. Where love rules, there is no will to power. And where power dominates, love is absent. Carl Jung. Most people live within a myth, the myth of their own goodness. Jung might have written this himself, though perhaps he only observed it in silence. All of us at some point bow to preserve peace. We pretend not to see. We swallow the scream. We yield once again out of fear of seeming too harsh. But there comes a breaking point, almost imperceptible, when the empath stops absorbing and begins to see. Not with anger, not with pain, but with a coldness that unsettles. That is today's theme. A dense immersion, like a dark hallway within the soul. Why is the cold empath more dangerous than a narcissist? Yet this is not only a video about psychological profiles, it is about you, who may have lost yourself in the dramas of others, trying to save those who never wanted salvation. It is about the moment your sensitivity ceased to be a burden and began transforming into a silent, lethal, but ethical weapon. Today, we will open the pages of the collective unconscious and walk with Carl Jung through the corridors where those who see too much dwell. But do not worry, here the truth may burn, yet you will never be alone. There exists a kind of silence that does not seek peace. It is not empty nor careless. It is a silence dense, precise, razor-sharp, and whoever has felt it knows it can wound more than 1,000 screamed words. It is not the silence of fear, but of one who has seen too much, swallowed it all, and now perceives. Imagine an empath, not the angelic caricature the world invented, not the naive figure of shallow narratives, but someone who spent an entire life detecting micro-expressions, sensing the weight of pauses in ordinary sentences, noticing subtle changes in tone that no one else perceives. Such people do not merely believe, they feel, and precisely for that reason, they are perfect targets for emotional predators. The narcissist, for instance, loves sensitive audiences, someone who interprets their silences as pain, their outbursts as unresolved traumas, their arrogance as a cry for love. And the empath, faithful to the role of silent healer, offers themselves not out of weakness, but out of compassion. But what happens when that compassion turns into exhaustion? When the one who absorbed everything begins to suspect they are being used as a dumping ground for emotional waste? When they realize that behind the phrase, "you're too sensitive," lies a strategy to make them doubt themselves? Carl Jung warned us, what we deny in ourselves appears later as fate, and what the empath often denies in themselves is their own anger, their own intuition, their own shadow, until it surfaces, not in fury, but in clarity. That is the turning point, and perhaps you have lived that moment without a name for it. The time when, facing an absurd accusation, you did not cry, you did not defend yourself, you simply looked as if for the first time you saw the creature behind the mask, not with hate, but with the surgical calm of one who has finally awakened. Jung called this the confrontation with the shadow, an inner right where everything once hidden, your emotional intelligence, your detailed memory, your perception, organizes itself silently and creates lucidity. The cold empath is not vengeful. They do not create scenes. They simply stop absorbing. And at that precise moment, the manipulator despairs because their strength was never in truth, but in the ability to distort emotions. And now there is no mirror left to reflect them with mercy. The transition is subtle, almost invisible to outsiders, but inside, it is as if the soul ceased to be a sponge and became a scalpel. That shift in presence shakes the manipulator. No more guilt to exploit, no cracks left to twist the narrative. For the first time, they stand before someone who sees them with absolute clarity. And that is something narcissists cannot bear. That silence is not absence, it is total presence. It is the union of all past episodes, read as a single pattern. It is the realization that you were never crazy, that your intuition, the same one they always said was exaggerated, was in fact your sharpest defense system. You just did not yet know how to wield it. Jung wrote that healing does not come from what is comfortable, but from confronting what we prefer to ignore. And for the empath, such confrontation is devastating, because it demands letting go of the self-image, of being good, peaceful, understanding. You begin to see yourself as someone who also has teeth, and more importantly, someone who can use them without losing humanity. But this new state of awareness carries a weight, because now you see the game in real time. You notice the compliments hiding control. You perceive silences loaded with demands. You understand that certain needs are in fact disguised manipulations. And that isolates you. For while most are still trapped in the emotional script, you are already on the other side of the stage, seeing the marks on the floor, the lighting effects, the entire script. You have become the director, and you no longer wish to act in anyone's drama. Do not mistake this. It is not coldness. It is lucidity. And lucidity, in a world of emotional noise, appears inhuman. But you know what is more dangerous than a narcissist? Someone who sees the narcissist. Someone who understands their logic and chooses not to react anymore, but to act with precision. That is the cold empath. And here is where the endgame begins. Now there is something you must understand. The most dangerous enemy is not outside. It is in your mind. That impulse that makes you explode. That anxiety that paralyzes you. That emotional attachment that weakens you from within. All of it follows a pattern. And until you restructure the mental model that fuels it, everything will repeat again and again. But there is a way to change that foundation. With cold logic, strategic awareness, and exercises in emotional retraining. There are wounds that do not scream. They whisper inside your thoughts while you pretend everything is fine. They are invisible scars left by years of concessions, swallowed words, apologies for mistakes you never made. The empath is not good because they want to appear good. They are good because early on, they learned their survival depended on it. Most empaths were born in environments where love came with conditions. If you stayed quiet, if you caused no trouble, if you understood that others' bad moods were simply from difficult days, you learned that feeling for others was safer than being felt by them. And that is where the prison began, where you became responsible for others' feelings while your own were locked in the basement. Carl Jung said, "All consciousness begins with an act of separation." And perhaps the first trauma of the empath was precisely that, the separation between what they felt and what they showed, between the inner pain and the compassionate mask, between the intuition that screamed and the need to preserve harmony. But comes a moment, intimate yet devastating, when that dissociation can no longer hold. It rarely comes with violence, but with a suffocating silence. It is when you realize you have been manipulated again, that you yielded again, that you betrayed yourself once more. That instant is what Jung would call the collapse of the adapted self, a subtle but profound breakdown where the soul cries out, "Enough." It is not an outward cry. There is no fight, no tears, only an ancient weariness. And in that moment, something changes, not because you decided to be strong, but because something within crumbled. You begin to remember not only what was done, but how it was done. The word placed with surgical care to wound without guilt. The distortion of your tone in front of others. The "you're exaggerating" that made you question your sanity. Jung called this clear emotional perception, the moment when the empath not only feels, but understands. And when understanding is born of pain, it carries dangerous power. It no longer wishes to hide. Here, lucidity settles in, cold, clear, uncomfortable. As if veils fall one by one, and you see everything as it always was, yet never dared to accept. That lucidity does not arrive as spiritual enlightenment. It arrives as grief. Because in that moment, you must bury not only the relationships that hurt you, but also the version of yourself that allowed it. You look in the mirror and whisper, "How did I let this happen?" And then the game changes. But before that, there is pain. Immense pain. Because freeing yourself from a prison demands recognizing you stayed there too long, even when the door was already ajar. That is the most brutal part of lucidity. It no longer allows excuses. Jung warned us, one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by becoming conscious of the darkness. And the empath, when awakened, does not become lighter. They become whole. The lucidity born of trauma is like a sharp scalpel. It cuts, but it also reveals. Reveals the child who learned that love meant repair. Reveals the adolescent who yielded to be accepted. Reveals the adult who confuses compassion with duty. But above all, reveals the power that was always there, dormant, silenced, yet intact. At that point, you no longer seek to convince anyone. You do not explain your silence. You do not try to appear fair. You simply are. And for manipulators, that is intolerable. Because the strength of the empath is not in screaming their pain. It is in seeing without losing themselves. It is in feeling and still choosing with whom to share. It is in having an open heart and well-locked doors. Lucidity is the greatest gift trauma can give, but it charges a price. You will never be the same, and perhaps you will never again fit into the same relationships. But that is all right. There is a kind of solitude that is sacred, and there is an entire life waiting on the other side of your own truth. There is a kind of coldness that does not come from rage. It is not absence of feelings, but the radical presence of truth. It appears on the empath's face at the moment something inside dies. Not love nor compassion, but illusion. The illusion that by being good enough, sensitive enough, tolerant enough, someone would love them without trying to dominate them. That is the birth of conscious coldness, a state of lucidity where the empath, once burdened with borrowed guilt, ceases to seek redemption in the eyes of others. Carl Jung called that moment the confrontation with the shadow, the instant when the individual stops fleeing from what they had learned to deny within themselves. And for the empath, that shadow is terrifyingly powerful. It contains all the repressed intuitions, all the minimized perceptions, all the swallowed impulses to say no. For years, that shadow was kept in the basement. After all, the empath had to be understanding, kind, available. They could not be cold, hard, calculating, for if they were, they might lose the love of those they most needed to please. But one day, and it happens almost silently, the shadow climbs the stairs. It does not break doors, it simply enters, and there is no way to pretend you do not see it. You become lucid, and with that, dangerous. The coldness born there is not hostility, it is an absolute boundary. The awakened empath realizes they no longer need to justify seeing what they see, no longer need to apologize for perceiving beyond words. They simply observe and understand. That disarms any manipulator, because they thrive on the emotional imbalance they create, and when they find no fertile ground for distortions, they collapse. The cold empath does not shout, does not retaliate. They withdraw access, and nothing is more unbearable for a narcissist than losing the stage that fueled their performance. This state of awareness, when the empath refuses another round of the emotional cycle, is what Jung described as the integration of the shadow. It is not about becoming cold or cruel, but about finally embracing the side that knows how to say enough. It is terrifying at first, because you were taught that your goodness depended on tolerating the intolerable. But as the shadow integrates, you understand. Goodness that always sacrifices itself is not virtue, it is anesthesia. Jung wrote, "No one becomes enlightened by fantasizing about figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." And that is exactly what the empath does when they awaken. They illuminate what was always dismissed as error, their sharp intuition, their legitimate anger, their real pain, and transform it into clarity. Clarity, that word that terrifies those who live on distortion. The coldness of the awakened empath does not corrode with violence, it corrodes with lucidity. And what few realize, even the empath themselves, is that this coldness is healing taking root. It is not revenge, it is emotional autonomy. Now the empath knows they do not need to explain themselves when setting a boundary. They are not exaggerating when they sense manipulation. They do not owe their peace to anyone who uses it as a tool of control. This new stance unsettles not only narcissists, but the entire circle around them. Friends and family start noticing something strange. You changed. You are more distant, harsher. But you are not harsher. You are more aware. The change is frightening because you no longer react according to expectations. You step out of the martyr role, and the scripts others rehearsed for you no longer work. Jung spoke of the importance of being whole rather than good, and the awakened empath understands. Integrity is accepting that empathy need not be available to everyone. You can choose. You must choose. Because empathy without discernment is slow emotional suicide. The awakening of the shadow is the phase where the empath learns to use sensitivity as radar, not as a chain. They stop justifying others' pain while silencing their own. They look into the eyes of those who try to distort them and think, no more. At that point, the narrative changes, because the empath, now lucid, becomes unpredictable. They no longer react. They anticipate. They no longer ask, am I exaggerating? They affirm, I am right. I always was. And that disarms any manipulation, because the game only works while the other doubts their own perception. But now, the empath no longer doubts, and without doubt, no manipulation can survive. For a long time, you believed that love meant giving yourself away, offering everything without limits, even when the other returned almost nothing. You learned silently and painfully that being empathic meant always being available, always understanding, always accessible. But no one told you that love without discernment becomes servitude, and that empathy, when given to someone who cannot receive it, turns into ammunition against you. Carl Jung said, "We do not reach illumination by denying darkness, but by making it conscious. And it is in that act of awareness that the cold empath is born, not as someone who stopped feeling, but as someone who began to choose for whom to feel. That is the rupture. Before, you gave yourself automatically. Now you observe. Before, you offered your shoulder before the other even asked. Now you ask yourself if that pain is truly yours to carry. This new stance confuses those who always fed on your emotional availability, because empathy was the channel through which they obtained not only affection, but power. Power to control your time, your energy, your peace. Power to trigger guilt if you dared to say no. But now you choose, and that choice comes with a different silence, a silence that is not absence, but sovereignty. The cold empath has learned to observe before connecting, to read between the lines, to perceive patterns and decide. This person deserves my care, not out of arrogance, but because scars taught many times that empathy without direction is an open channel for emotional abuse. Jung spoke of individuation as a journey of integration between the unconscious and the conscious. And part of that journey is understanding that giving is not always loving. Sometimes it is extinguishing yourself. Sometimes it is sabotaging yourself. You spent years trying to heal others, but now, looking back, you realize many of them never wanted to heal. They wanted someone to carry their burden, or rather, to transfer it. Selective empathy arises when you understand that not every pain needs your compassion. Some pains are shields, some tears are strategies, some confessions come with hidden hooks. You begin to notice this not from speeches, but from effects. You leave a conversation more exhausted than when you entered. You feel you are always explaining, always defending, always trying to reconnect. You perceive that certain relationships are not bridges, but labyrinths. And then something changes. You begin to protect your energy like one protects an altar. You discover that your soul is not public space. It is temple, sacred silence, a place that should only be entered barefoot. Selective empathy is this: the conscious choice of with whom you share your depth. Because now you know, whoever does not respect your pain does not deserve your listening. Whoever uses fragility as manipulation does not deserve your shoulder. Whoever seeks you only when in need, but disappears when you collapse, does not deserve your presence. And the hardest part of all is realizing you were that shoulder anyway, not out of weakness, but out of faith. The faith that the other would change, that with your love, everything would be solved. But true love, when offered to someone who refuses to see, becomes useless sacrifice. You begin to notice it in the smallest things, the message that never arrives, the "I'm busy" that always appears when you need it most, the "you're exaggerating" that tries to silence your intuition. And you understand. It is not lack of love. It is lack of reciprocity, lack of emotional maturity, lack of yourself in the equation. Jung believed true emotional maturity arrives when we learn to differentiate what we feel from what we must do with what we feel. And selective empathy is precisely that. Knowing that to feel is not the same as to yield. Knowing that to understand is not to submit. Knowing that to love is not to allow everything. This new awareness changes everything. You no longer respond on impulse. You breathe before offering help. You listen, but do not absorb. You accompany, but only up to the point where you do not erase yourself. It is in this layer of transformation that the empath ceases to be a mirror and becomes a lighthouse, no longer reflecting the pain of others, as if it were your own. You illuminate what the other does not yet see, but only if the other wants to look. And here lies the hardest part. Some people will leave, others will distance, others will accuse you of having changed. But it is not you who changed. It is that now you choose yourself first, and those who thrived on your self-abandonment do not know how to handle that. Selective empathy is not coldness, it is maturity. It is the love you once gave to others, finally directed toward yourself. And in the end, you understand. The one who deserves your soul is not the one who makes you feel necessary, but the one who respects who you are, even when you say no. When you finally see everything and no longer need to pretend you did not, the question changes. It is no longer, why did they do this to me? It is, what will I do with the power that this pain gave me? The transformed empath is dangerous, not because they become cruel, but because now they could be, and choose every day not to. Jung said, every human being, when becoming aware of their shadow, also finds their capacity to destroy, not as metaphor, but as psychological truth. Because whoever sees too much can manipulate. Whoever feels deeply can use it as leverage. Whoever understands the blind spots of another can exploit their vulnerabilities with surgical precision. And there, ethics becomes an abyss. Because what the empath carries after transformation is more than empathy, it is real psychic power. They know when someone is lying, feel the shift of the eyes, the micro-movement of a lip, the hesitation in a pause, the tremor in a tone of voice. They recognize the emotional script before the first phrase is complete. And if they wanted, they could use all that to win. They could reverse roles, dismantle defenses, expose weaknesses with elegance. They could wound without ever raising their voice. But here lies the ethical dilemma. Because the cold empath is no longer naive. They know their clarity can be weapon or balm. They know their silence can be peace or punishment. They know their ability to see can liberate or imprison. And the question haunting them is, who do I become now that no one else controls me? That dilemma is real and silent. It is easy to be carried away by bitterness, by the acid taste of knowing you were betrayed, used, exploited for so long, and that now you finally have the means to strike back. But Jung warns us, the person who does not face their own shadow will be condemned to project it on others, meaning whoever does not choose will be chosen by the darkness they carry. The line between healing and destruction is thin, and the transformed empath walks it every day. They can be the strongest healer of a group, the one who listens without judgment, but with discernment, the one who with a phrase reveals the truth the other avoided for years, and with it brings liberation. But they can also be the most devastating opponent, because they do not need to shout, they simply show the mirror. And sometimes that is worse than any attack. And the most dangerous thing is that nobody expected it, because they were the sensitive one, the good one, the one everyone used as emotional crutch. Now they are something else. Not cruel, but firm. Not merciless, but unbreakable. Not seeking revenge, but knowing exactly what was done. And that presence, that serene gaze of one who no longer trembles, is unbearable for the manipulator. But the cold empath must watch themselves, because it is too easy to use that power to prove a point, to test others, to act as judge, and that turns them into what they swore never to be. That is why true transformation does not end in coldness. It begins after it, in the conscious choice of what to do with the clarity now possessed. It is not about forgiving everything or moving on quickly. It is about deciding who is worth your vision, who deserves your depth, who can grow beside you, and not just hang on you. That is the psychic maturity Jung spoke of, the full integration of the shadow, where you no longer fight it, but you also do not let it drive. You converse with it, you acknowledge, yes, I could hurt, but I choose not to. I do not need that. The true strength of the cold empath is in restraint, in the ability to see the worst in another and still not become the same, to stand before provocation and remain silent, but not the silence of swallowing, rather the silence of transcendence. And that is power, not the power to dominate, but the power of never being dominated again. In relationships, this posture changes everything, because now you recognize patterns quickly. You no longer wait to improve. You name what you see. You say, "This is emotional blackmail." And if the other denies it, you do not try to convince, you simply walk away. At work, you are no longer drained. You fulfill, you collaborate, but you no longer tolerate disrespect disguised as demand. In family, roles change. You are no longer the one who listens in silence. You are the one who firmly and lovingly says, "I love you, but I will not take part in this anymore." And that silent transformation, without fireworks, changes entire systems. Because where before there was someone absorbing everything, now there is someone who chooses. And in the end, it is that choice that defines what you will become. You can use your vision to heal those still salvageable, or you can use it to humiliate those who hurt you. Both paths are open, but only one makes you free. So you came this far, and if you did, it is because something inside you already knew. Knew you were not weak for feeling too much. Knew your sensitivity was not a flaw, but a gift misdirected. And perhaps now you have understood what Carl Jung tried to show us his entire life. Healing is not about choosing between light or shadow, but allowing both to walk silently within you. Because the true strength of the cold empath is not protecting against everyone. It is maturely choosing who deserves to cross your inner world. You no longer need to prove you are good, nor carry the pain of those who refuse to change. You do not have to save anyone. You only need to remember that your empathy is sacred, and there is a point where loving another without discernment is to stop loving yourself. Now you know it. You see too much, you feel too much, you remember everything, and with that, you carry a power manipulators cannot bear to face. The question is, what will you do with it? Spiritual awakening is exactly that, an unrelenting light that illuminates the darkness within us and around us. This transformation does not simply reveal the truth of who we are. It also exposes the hidden dynamics that shaped our relationships. Imagine your life as a musical instrument. For years, your strings vibrated at a certain frequency, playing a melody that harmonized with the people around you. But with awakening, your tone shifts, your vibrations rise, and suddenly, those strings that once seemed in harmony begin to sound dissonant. The sensation is confusing and often painful. Relationships that once felt safe can become spaces of conflict. This happens because as you reconnect with your essence, patterns such as emotional dependency or manipulation, once invisible, become intolerable. And it is in that moment that the most difficult question emerges. How do you remain faithful to your new authenticity, even if it means losing those you love? The truth is that this rupture is necessary. What appears to be loss is actually cleansing. Space is being created for something new, something aligned with who you are becoming. In this journey, you will discover how this process transforms not only your relationships, but also your relationship with yourself. Prepare to understand why, despite its challenges, this path is the greatest gift you can offer your soul. Spiritual awakening is not an isolated event. It is like opening the doors of a mansion you never knew you inhabited, only to find that its corridors are filled with shadows, reflecting parts of yourself. As you walk those halls, you realize that what once felt secure and familiar, your relationships, your beliefs, your routines, begins to collapse. And this is no accident. Carl Jung, one of the greatest explorers of the human psyche, taught that individuation requires confrontation with the unconscious. For him, the soul's journey is always a descent before it becomes an ascent. In that descent, you recognize that many people around you were not connected to your essence, but to your masks, the very masks that awakening now demands you remove. Picture a moth drawn to artificial lights all its life. The glow of the lamp seemed the only true beacon, but once it discovers the sun, everything changes. The moth can no longer find satisfaction in the lamps that once fascinated it. Likewise, awakening reveals an inner light so radiant that the artificial glow of superficial dynamics becomes unbearable. This process can be devastating, for it exposes patterns you never noticed. Perhaps that comfortable relationship was built on dependency, where you sought external validation rather than facing your own insecurity. Or perhaps those friendships thrived only because you remained on the same frequency, never questioning, never growing. When your vibration changes, those connections short-circuit. Jung also said that what we deny within ourselves finds expression in the outside world. Awakening brings this truth to the surface with brutal clarity. It reveals not only the wounds, but also how many of your relationships are mirrors of them. That friend who makes you feel inferior, that partner who silences you, that relative who feeds your fears. All these connections reflect what you must heal within yourself. And then comes the choice. Will you keep holding on to distorted mirrors, or will you let them go and finally see with clarity? This is where many hesitate, for letting go is never easy. What do you do when these relationships carry years of history? How do you accept that some people are simply not ready to walk beside you in your evolution? Imagine tuning the strings of a guitar. Before, they were slightly out of tune, but you never noticed. Now, as you carefully adjust each one, you discover that some strings can no longer keep the melody you are creating. This does not mean the guitar is broken. It means some strings need to be adjusted or replaced. The same is true of spiritual awakening. You are not broken. The relationships that fall away are not punishment or mistake. They are reflections of the new music you are composing. And that music, even if it brings moments of solitude, is a call towards something greater. Still, solitude often feels like an unbearable void. You ask yourself, was I wrong to transform? Should I have remained the same just to preserve the comfort of those connections? The answer lies in the process itself. Just as a field must be cleared of weeds to flourish, your life too requires space for new growth. This cleansing is often painful. Relationships that once felt eternal begin to feel hollow. Promises of eternal friendship or love sound false in the light of your new perception. But remember, what collapses are the foundations built upon an older version of you. And here is the beauty of the process. With every relationship that dissolves, a new possibility appears. new people enter your life, resonating with your higher frequency. Connections based on authenticity and respect emerge, as though they had been waiting for the right moment to blossom. Jung said that authenticity is the highest achievement of the self, and that is precisely what awakening demands. It calls you to be authentic, even if it means facing judgment, rejection, and solitude. Have you noticed how awakening does not tolerate falseness? It shines into the darkest corners of your psyche and demands honesty. In that light, the hidden dynamics of your relationships become impossible to ignore. That friend who has always used your vulnerability against you, or that partner who tries to control every aspect of your life, now appear with uncomfortable clarity. You now stand at a crossroads. Continuing on this path of expansion means accepting that some people are not ready to accompany you. But what if I told you this is not the end? The emptiness you feel is only the prelude to something much greater. Stay with me, and you will see how this process, though painful, is the greatest gift you can give yourself. You will learn to navigate these endings with grace and courage, and to create fertile ground for authentic connections to flourish. The path of awakening often feels like a dance between light and shadow. There are moments of ecstasy when you sense you are connected to something vast, transcendent. But there are also moments of deep sorrow when you realize not everyone can or wishes to dance with you. Letting go is like walking across a rope bridge, swinging over an abyss. On one side lies the comfort of old relationships, even if marked by manipulation or dependence. On the other side lies the promise of a new beginning, a place where you can be fully authentic and vibrate in harmony with your true self. And Carl Jung reminded us, no one becomes enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. That act of confronting darkness, both internal and external, transforms awakening into a revolution. And relationships, often mirrors of our wounds, become catalysts for that confrontation. Think of the friend who reinforced your insecurities with subtle remarks, or the relative who kept reminding you of past mistakes as though they were permanent tattoos. During awakening, these dynamics become unbearable. You begin to question why you tolerated them for so long, and realize they no longer have meaning in your new reality. Yet here lies the dilemma. Leaving these relationships often brings overwhelming guilt. You wonder if you are being selfish, if you are abandoning those who depend on you emotionally. But here is the truth. You must remember that awakening is not an act of selfishness, but of integrity. It is not about rejecting others. It is about honoring who you are becoming. Imagine your life as an old house. Over the years, furniture and objects pile up, some broken, others covered in dust. When you decide to restore that house, you see that you must let go of everything that no longer serves, even if it holds sentimental value. You understand that to create a welcoming and functional space, you must release the old to allow the new. Spiritual awakening is that restoration. The relationships that no longer resonate with your frequency are like that old furniture. They still carry meaning, but they no longer belong in the home of your new life. And that cleansing, though painful, does not happen only outside, it happens within. Spiritual awakening forces you to turn inward and confront behavioral patterns that contributed to dysfunctional dynamics. You begin to notice how your need for approval led you to accept less than you deserved, or how your fear of rejection kept you trapped in relationships that never allowed you to grow. And here lies the beauty of the process. When you release those chains, you do not only create space for new connections, but you also strengthen the most important relationship of all, the one with yourself. Carl Jung said that loneliness does not come from the absence of people around us, but from the inability to communicate the things that matter most. During awakening, you may feel isolated, not because you are truly alone, but because your new perspectives seem incomprehensible to those still entangled in old narratives. Yet this period of solitude is not punishment. It is an invitation to explore your inner world, to cultivate a garden where your authenticity and truth can bloom. And when that garden flourishes, it draws people who resonate with your new frequency, connections that are deep, authentic, and aligned with who you are becoming. However, this path is not linear. There will be moments when you doubt yourself, when you miss the past, even though you know it no longer serves you. These moments are part of the process, reminding you that transformation is not instant, but a continuous journey of growth and evolution. And what if I told you that every relationship you lose along the way is replaced by something far greater? That by releasing control, you allow the universe to bring people and experiences aligned with your higher purpose. Stay with me, because we are going to explore tools and practices that will help you navigate this journey with more clarity and confidence. We will discover how to transform loneliness into self-sufficiency and how to create an energetic field so strong that it attracts only what is true and aligned with your new reality. As you begin to move toward this new version of yourself, something curious happens. People you never imagined would leave suddenly disappear from your life, almost as if carried away by an invisible current. And those with whom you once shared a deep bond may start to feel distant, even incompatible with who you are becoming. This phenomenon is not random. It is the direct result of vibrational changes that occur during spiritual awakening. When your energetic frequency rises, you literally disconnect from lower vibrations. It is like tuning into a new radio station. The old one has not vanished, but it is no longer audible to you. Jung described this process as a movement toward wholeness, reminding us that vision becomes clear only when you can look into your heart. He said, "Who looks outside dreams, who looks inside awakens." And by looking inward, you begin to see how many of the bonds sustaining your life were built on projections, on versions of yourself that no longer exist. But what happens to relationships that withstand this transformation? Some bonds, especially those rooted in genuine love and mutual respect, undergo restructuring. It is like tuning the strings of an instrument to play a new melody. These relationships, although challenging, can evolve into something deeper and more meaningful because they now align with your authenticity. On the other hand, connections that cannot adapt begin to dissolve. This may be painful, yet it is also liberating. Imagine carrying a backpack full of stones during a long journey. At first, you hardly notice the weight because you are used to carrying it. But as you progress, it becomes clear that those stones are slowing you down. Letting them go is not cruelty. It is self-compassion. This is where many face the dilemma of attachment. You may feel that leaving a relationship behind means betrayal or failure, but the truth is that spiritual evolution demands courage. The courage to recognize that loyalty to yourself must always come first. And what about solitude? For many, it appears as the inevitable shadow of awakening. The disconnection from close people can bring emptiness, an uncomfortable silence that echoes in the soul. Yet that silence is not your enemy. It is a portal, a space where you can reconnect with forgotten or neglected parts of yourself. This is the moment when you begin to discover the power of solitude. Unlike loneliness, solitude is a state of wholeness with yourself. It is the realization that your own company is enough, that your validation no longer needs to come from the outside. This state makes it possible to attract more aligned relationships in the future, because you are no longer seeking to fill a void, but to share inner abundance. In this space, you begin to perceive the gifts of awakening. Your emotions become clearer, your intuition sharper, your vision of the world more expansive. What once seemed like an irreparable loss reveals itself as an exchange, the old version of yourself, with all its limitations, for a version deeply connected to your essence. And then something magical happens. Just as a garden flourishes after being cleansed, your life begins to attract new people, opportunities, and experiences resonating with your higher vibration. Relationships based on reciprocity, respect, and authenticity appear as unexpected gifts, carrying with them the sense that everything is finally falling into place. The journey continues, bringing new challenges and discoveries, but now with a crucial difference. You are stronger, more centered, and more aligned with who you truly are. As this transformation deepens, you realize that spiritual awakening is not merely a journey of self-discovery, but a process of death and rebirth. Death of old patterns, limiting beliefs, and often relationships that once seemed unbreakable. Rebirth of an authenticity long buried under conditioning and external expectations. Jung said that the encounter with the shadow is the narrow path to the self, and part of that encounter involves recognizing that many relationships you once cultivated were built on unstable foundations, not on who you truly are, but on who you thought you needed to be in order to be accepted or loved. This clash between who you were and who you are becoming is like an earthquake exposing hidden cracks. These cracks manifest in many ways. A friend who once seemed harmless now reveals patterns of envy or sabotage. A romantic relationship that once provided emotional security begins to feel suffocating because it relies on control or codependence. Even family ties can feel fragile, as you realize some were rooted in fear or obligation rather than genuine love. Such revelations can bring deep pain, as if the ground beneath you were crumbling. But this pain is not punishment, it is purification. Just as gold is refined by fire to reveal its purest form, awakening uses these ruptures to uncover the essence of who you are. There will be moments when the journey feels endless. You may wonder why you must lose so much to gain so little. But the truth is that every loss is a release of something misaligned with your higher purpose. Each relationship that dissolves creates space for something more authentic and meaningful. Imagine crossing a river. You must release the stones you carry, for they only pull you under. At first, letting go seems impossible, because those stones represent stories, memories, and bonds you learn to value. But as you release them, you realize you can swim more freely, more swiftly, with less effort. And on the other side, something unexpected happens. You meet others who have also released their stones. They do not demand that you return to retrieve what you left behind. They do not try to mold or trap you in old narratives. Instead, they meet you where you are, accepting who you are now, without judgment or expectation. That is the power of aligned relationships. They are built not on need, but on choice, not on fear of loneliness, but on the desire to share a journey. And though rare, such connections carry a profound and transformative impact. Yet to reach this point, patience is essential. Patience with yourself and with the process. Awakening is not a single event, but a series of waves, each carrying you deeper into your truth. Every wave may at first appear overwhelming, but with time reveals itself as an indispensable lesson. Jung reminds us that the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are, and part of that privilege is accepting that not everyone can accompany you on this path. This does not mean you love them less. It means you now understand that true love begins with self-love. As you continue walking this path, a sense of clarity emerges. You recognize that losses do not define you. What defines you is how you choose to respond to them. You understand that solitude is not punishment, but preparation. And most importantly, you realize that awakening is ultimately a reconnection with yourself, with your essence, and with the universe surrounding you. As you open yourself to this new reality, life responds. What once seemed to be falling apart was in truth the universe rearranging everything so you could live in alignment with your deepest truth. And within that truth, you find not only peace, but also the freedom to be exactly who you were born to be. As you walk further into this journey, every step reveals a new horizon. What was once familiar and safe now feels distant, almost like the memory of another life. It is within this contrast between the old and the new that you begin to perceive the magnitude of your transformation. It is not merely about changing who you are, it is about remembering who you have always been before you were shaped by external expectations. Spiritual awakening works like a lens that sharpens the focus of your perception. Relationships and situations that once seemed obvious now appear in high definition, with all the details you previously ignored. You begin to see not only the people around you, but also yourself with greater honesty and without filters. This honesty can be unsettling because it exposes the fragile foundations that sustained many of your connections. At other times, awakening arrives like a storm. It does not ask permission, it does not wait for the right moment. It simply appears, shaking everything that is not aligned. That relationship that seemed eternal now dissolves like sand, slipping through your fingers. And as painful as this may feel, there is a profound wisdom in the process. It is not destruction by accident, but intentional reconstruction. Carl Jung, in his wisdom, reminds us that what you resist persists, and resisting these changes only prolongs suffering. When you surrender to the flow, allowing what must leave to go, you discover an unexpected lightness. Life suddenly ceases to be a battle against the current and becomes a dance with it. At times, that dance feels lonely. You find yourself questioning why others cannot see what is now so obvious to you. Yet that difference in perspective is not a mistake, but a natural consequence of your growth. Just like a plant reaching toward light, you are moving beyond what once confined you. And then something extraordinary begins to unfold. The more you align with your authenticity, the more magnetic your presence becomes, not because you are trying to attract anyone, but because your elevated vibration does so effortlessly. Those who resonate with your energy appear, while those unprepared to walk beside you drift away. This new reality, however, requires discernment. Not everything that seems aligned at first is genuine. Here, your intuition, now sharper, becomes your greatest ally. You learn to recognize what is true and to release what is not, even if it means letting go of something that once appeared promising. There are also moments of deep introspection, when you begin to realize not everything that collapsed was caused by others. Some of it was held together by your own choices, your own wounds. This understanding may be painful, yet it is also incredibly liberating, because by accepting responsibility, you reclaim your power. Think of awakening as a great spiritual cleansing. At first, the chaos appears greater than before, but with time, the cleared space begins to reveal beauty hidden beneath layers of disorder. Every piece you choose to keep or release contributes to shaping a life more aligned with who you truly are. And with that arises a sense of gratitude, not for having lost connections or endured challenges, but for everything those experiences taught you. You realize that every person who crossed your path, even those who brought pain, played an essential role in your evolution. As silence settles into your life, it ceases to be a frightening emptiness and becomes fertile ground for new creations. You start hearing your own voice more clearly, feeling your own energy more intensely. It is as though the world around you is reorganizing itself to reflect the new harmony you are cultivating within. This process is by no means linear. There are unexpected turns, moments of doubt, and relapses into old patterns. But every time you choose to move forward, even in uncertainty, you take a step toward freedom. The freedom to be who you truly are, without needing to fit molds that no longer serve you. And then what once seemed endless chaos begins to make sense. Not because all the answers are clear, but because you have learned to trust the process. With every rupture, with every reconstruction, you move closer to your essence, to your light. And it is that light which illuminates the path for the next stages of your journey. Have you ever felt the world around you shifting, even though everything looks the same? As if suddenly, conversations that once comforted you sound empty, or places that felt safe become unbearable. This is how spiritual awakening begins to transform not only your perception, but also what you accept as truth in your life. The process is like removing glasses after years. At first, the brightness may feel blinding, even uncomfortable, but soon you realize you are seeing the world with more clarity than ever. And that clarity, though liberating, can bring profound emotional challenges. Think about the most important relationships in your life. How many were built on the need to belong, the search for approval, or the fear of being alone? Those bonds, though once meaningful, now reveal themselves as silent contracts you accepted unconsciously. Contracts demanding you diminish yourself, adapt, or avoid being who you truly are, just to maintain peace. Carl Jung said there is no awakening of consciousness without pain, and it is precisely this pain that arises when you realize some of those contracts must be broken, not because you no longer love those people, but because love for yourself has finally become a priority. Breaking such patterns can be terrifying. It is like standing at the edge of a cliff, staring into the vast unknown below. The natural impulse is to cling to what is familiar, even if that means carrying the weight of relationships that no longer make sense. But spiritual awakening invites you to jump, not to fall, but to discover you can fly. That leap does not mean abandonment. It means transformation. It means looking at those relationships with compassion, recognizing the role they played in your life, but also accepting they do not need to walk with you any longer. You realize you are not rejecting those people. You are choosing a path that reflects your truth. And in that process, something powerful happens. You begin freeing yourself from expectations that were never truly yours. The need to please, to prove your worth, or to avoid conflict dissolves, replaced by a peace that rises from within, a peace that depends not on external validation, but on the certainty that you are living in coherence with who you really are. This does not mean the path will be easy. There will be moments of nostalgia when you remember the good times shared with people who now feel distant. Yet nostalgia does not need to be a burden. It can remind you that true love does not disappear even when circumstances change. And so, as you continue moving forward, you begin attracting new connections. People not interested in who you were, but in who you are becoming. Relationships that do not require constant effort to sustain harmony because they flow naturally with your energy. Imagine this as a magnetic field. The more you align with your essence, the stronger this field becomes. It repels what is not in tune and attracts what is. Not because you try to control who enters or leaves your life, but because your vibration speaks for itself. This field also protects you, preventing old patterns from dragging you back, because now you recognize the signs of when something is not aligned. You learn to say no without guilt, to set boundaries without fear, and to prioritize your peace above everything. But perhaps the most transformative aspect of this process is the impact it has on the most important relationship of all, the one with yourself. Without the distractions of misaligned connections, you begin to hear your own voice with greater clarity. That voice, silenced for so long, now becomes your most trustworthy guide. You discover that the solitude that once seemed like an unbearable void is actually a gift, an invitation to reconnect with who you truly are, to explore parts of yourself that were ignored or neglected. It is in this space where you find your strength, your creativity, and your inner peace. And then something magical happens. The more you align with your truth, the more the universe seems to conspire in your favor. What once seemed impossible begins to flow with ease. New opportunities emerge, new paths open, and you realize that life is far richer and more expansive than you ever imagined. This is the true essence of spiritual awakening. It is not about escaping pain, but about walking through it with courage. It is not about avoiding change, but about embracing it as part of your evolution. Because in the end, awakening is not only about who you are becoming, it is about remembering who you have always been. Every step on this path is a discovery. Small things that once went unnoticed now hold deeper meaning. You start to notice that what appeared to be coincidence, unexpected encounters, words that touch your soul, signs that appear in moments of doubt, are actually part of a silent dialogue between you and the universe. This dialogue is not about immediate answers, but about subtle guidance. It invites you to observe, to feel, and to trust. Yet trusting can be difficult, especially when everything around you seems to be falling apart. How can you believe there is a purpose behind the pain of losing connections, the weight of age, or the emptiness that feels endless? The truth is that emptiness is not a hole you must fill, but a space you must honor. It is like winter in the cycle of seasons. It seems cold and barren. But it is in this period when the earth rests, when seeds prepare to germinate. The same happens within you. That space which feels so frightening is actually fertile ground where new possibilities begin to grow. And in this soil, one thing becomes evident. Spiritual awakening is not a promise that everything will be easy. It is not a guarantee that you will never feel pain or doubt again. But it is a call to truth, the truth of who you are, of what you need, and of what you deserve. Carl Jung said that until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. That is what spiritual awakening does. It brings into the light all the stories you have told yourself, stories of inadequacy, sacrifice, and fear, and places them before you so that you can rewrite them. To rewrite these stories requires courage, because doing so means letting go of what no longer serves you, even if you have clung to it for a long time. You must be willing to release the old in order to make space for the new, and the new does not always arrive in the way you expect. Sometimes it comes as a challenge, a situation that tests your patience, your faith, and your strength. Other times it arrives as an unexpected blessing, a person who enters your life at the perfect moment, a revelation that transforms your perspective, or an opportunity that seems made just for you. These moments are like beacons that illuminate the road ahead. They do not remove the obstacles, but they make it easier to continue, even when the terrain is difficult. Because now, you are no longer walking in darkness. As you move forward, you begin to notice something extraordinary. Spiritual awakening is not only an individual journey, it is a movement that transforms everything around you. When you change, your relationships change, your energy changes, and with time, the world around you begins to align with this new reality. People who resonate with your new frequency appear almost as if by magic. They are connections that require no effort to maintain because they flow naturally. These people do not want you to be something you are not. They are not interested in controlling you or manipulating you. They are there because, like you, they are seeking authenticity and truth. And when you experience this kind of connection, everything makes sense. The pain of loss, the loneliness of the path, the emptiness that once felt unbearable, all of it reveals itself as part of a preparation, a necessary process for you to arrive here. But the most surprising discovery is realizing that while these connections appear, your relationship with yourself also strengthens. You uncover a new confidence, not based on external approval, but on the certainty that you are enough exactly as you are. This new sense of self-worth changes everything. You begin to say yes to what nourishes your soul and no to what drains it. You stop settling for emotional crumbs and begin to demand and offer wholeness. And this is not arrogance, it is self-love. Then something incredible happens. What once seemed like a lonely journey transforms into a cycle of sharing. You realize that by living your truth, you inspire others to do the same. Your light not only illuminates your own path, but also the path of those around you. This is the true gift of spiritual awakening. It is not just about you. It is about the impact your transformation has on the world. It is about how, by finding your own light, you become a beacon for those still searching for theirs. Have you noticed how, during spiritual awakening, even the simplest details begin to carry a different weight? A casual conversation, a song playing in the background, or even the silence of a quiet morning suddenly feel full of meaning, as if life itself is trying to tell you something you are finally ready to hear. That is the power of presence. Before, your attention was scattered between worries of the past, anxieties about the future, and the need to meet the expectations of others. But now, it is as if a ray of light shines upon the present moment, showing you that it is here, and only here, where true transformation happens. And in this new light, something fascinating emerges. What once seemed so urgent, so essential, begins to fade like smoke in the wind. Conversations filled with superficialities, habits that merely occupied time, commitments that existed only to avoid silence. All of it loses strength as if now you can see life with clarity. What remains then is not a search for more, but for less. Less noise, less distraction, fewer relationships that only take up space. A deep desire for authenticity appears, for connections that feed the soul, for moments that truly matter. This change does not happen in a single instant. It is a subtle movement, almost imperceptible, but it grows with every choice, every thought, every step. And as you dive deeper into this path, you realize that it is not about finding definitive answers, but about asking the right questions. Who am I now? What really matters? How can I honor what I feel and who I am becoming? The answers arrive, but not from outside. They emerge from within, in the stillness of being present, in the courage of accepting what is, and in the constant invitation to keep exploring. Because deep down, you know that this path, which at first seemed so challenging, is only the beginning of something far greater. If this message has resonated with you, and you feel called to keep walking this path of inner discovery, I invite you to subscribe to the channel and activate the notification bell so you never miss new reflections that can guide and inspire your journey. Remember, transformation is not a destination, but a continuous unfolding of who you are meant to become. As Carl Jung said, "Who looks outside, dreams. Who looks inside, awakens." Have you ever stopped to wonder, what if everything they call love is nothing more than fear of being alone? What if the need to have someone is simply a disguise to avoid facing the emptiness within yourself? And what if what you call a relationship is just another way to run away from you? Nothing is closer to the truth than the discomfort we feel in solitude. Carl Jung once urged us to imagine being on our deathbed, the room dark, the sounds muffled by a consciousness slowly detaching from the body. And then in that final silence, a question whispers, did you live your own life, or did you merely accompany someone else's? At some point, all of us are seduced by that pre-written script. Find someone, love, share a life, grow old together. It sounds beautiful, it sounds safe, but no one tells us what is lost in that process. No one speaks of the parts of ourselves that die in the name of harmony, of the dreams stored away, of the desires silenced, of the soul bending slowly until it forgets how to stand tall. Jung understood that certain paths demand silence, solitude, and sacrifice, not of the self, but of the other. Because true individuation never negotiates. Truth cannot be shared with one who still fears their own shadow. Society, with its programmed smiles and high-definition weddings, does not forgive those who choose to walk alone. You are selfish. You will end up alone. Nobody is happy without a partner. These phrases arrive like inverted prayers, spoken more out of fear than wisdom. But what if they are wrong? What if fulfillment is not found in meeting the right person, but in becoming the person no one could ever replace? This is not against love. It is for choosing oneself, even if it means walking through deserts where few dare to step. We will unearth Jung's insights, illuminate the dark corridors of the mind, and reveal what most fear to even imagine. Remaining single can be the most radical form of freedom, and perhaps the only way to avoid self-betrayal. You grew up hearing you needed to find someone who would understand you, complete you, fill that void you couldn't name but felt every night before sleep. From an early age, culture imposed this idea. You will only be happy when you are with someone else. And if you are alone, something is wrong with you. The message is subtle, but relentless. Single people are seen as incomplete, suspicious, broken, as if solitude were a flaw, a personal failure. But what if it were the opposite? What if the need to love were just a disguised form of escape, a defense mechanism against the terror of facing your own soul, naked, raw, without distractions? Jung recognized something most still avoid seeing. Most do not love. They cling. They use the other as a shield against their own existence. That is the true illusion of romantic love, the belief that another person will save us from ourselves. You meet someone, you fall in love, you feel warmth, a sense of purpose, and then adaptation begins, small, almost invisible. At first you change an opinion to avoid conflict. You silence a desire. You sacrifice a habit. You call it maturity. You call it partnership. But in reality, you are beginning to disappear. And one day, without realizing it, you wake up and no longer know who you are. Your essence has been replaced by a compliant character, someone living in fear of losing what they believe they cannot live without. Jung did not despise love. He despised surrender. The surrender of autonomy, of creation, of the necessary madness to become oneself. Romantic love as an ideal demands that you dissolve into the other, building an identity upon fusion and emotional dependence. And that fusion kills what is most valuable: creative chaos. A man can only truly be himself when he is alone. This truth is heavier than most can bear, because being alone requires courage, and being with someone is often just a beautiful way to avoid that confrontation. It is not about opposing relationships. It is about recognizing the psychological price many pay to maintain the illusion of completeness in a couple. Most couples you see live in an apparent peace, but look closer. There are concessions that cost pieces of the soul. There are silences hiding drowned desires. There are marriages that are not alliances, but pacts of emotional survival. Jung warned that such unions can become cages where the will to self-realization slowly withers, and romantic love, in practice, often becomes an emotional prison, signed with flowers and promises. Have you ever seen an artist create in the middle of constant noise? Have you tried to dive into your own thoughts while managing someone else's moods? The soul that expands needs space, but romantic love demands containment, adjustments, endless negotiations. What to eat, who to talk to, how much time to give to the other. An internal committee deciding whether your choices are compatible with the relationship's boundaries. It is exhausting. And behind all that negotiation hides a dangerous idea that you only have value if you belong to something greater, a couple. Jung saw this fantasy as perilous. He warned against projecting onto a partner everything we deny in ourselves. Your sensitivity, your intuition, your tenderness, everything is externalized, and thus you fragment yourself, mutilate yourself to fit, and you call it love. But true love does not demand that you vanish. It does not ask you to negotiate your essence, to dim your light so as not to outshine the other, to hide your pain for the sake of peace. The love Jung defended was something else. Amor fati, the love of one's destiny, one's path, of life as it is, absurdities included. And it begins the moment you stop seeking outside what you must find within. You do not need someone to complete you. You need courage to face yourself. Courage to walk alone when everything around you calls that failure. Because it is precisely in voluntary solitude that integrity is born, and from it, everything else. The search for wholeness in another weakens us, because it distracts us from our most sacred task, becoming whole on our own. Perhaps this is the question you most need to hear today. Do you truly want to love someone? Or are you trying to avoid yourself? Now there is something you must know. Has it ever happened that just when you most need to stay calm, your mind collapses? That loss of control is not just emotional, it is mental. It happens because most were trained to feel before thinking, to react before observing. The problem is structural. No one taught us to train the mind as a muscle. That is why every small frustration becomes an explosion, and every challenge an inner defeat. But there is another way to operate, a structure rooted in neuroscience, applied philosophy, and silent mental techniques that reprogram the way you respond and place you back in command. Freedom has always had a price, and very few are willing to pay it. Being free sounds noble and inspiring, but when reality arrives, cold, silent, and without guarantees, most run back to the safety of the known. Carl Jung understood this as few could. He knew that to live in true freedom, one must renounce what the world values most: belonging, acceptance, and emotional comfort. Solitude is not a trend or an aesthetic. It is a psychic battlefield where the fragile collapse. The free individual must face the mirror without masks, without distractions, without excuses, and almost no one is willing to do that. Most prefer to live in emotional bubbles, surrounded by validation, distractions, and commitments that seem important, but serve only to fill the void with noise. For Jung, solitude was never a punishment, but a condition, the necessary ground to become something beyond the average, to stop being the domesticated, reactive, conformist man, and instead become the creator of one's own values. This individual is what he would call the individuated self, the one who has transcended the herd mentality. But no one becomes this by being surrounded by caresses and pats on the back. The freedom Jung spoke of demands leaving the herd, and leaving the herd is a rupture, a mourning. You lose friends, lovers, and the comfort that comes with predictability. But in exchange, you gain yourself. Jung lived this choice to its ultimate consequences. He was not solitary by accident, but by conviction. He immersed himself in his inner world, writing, walking, confronting his own thoughts to the very limits of sanity. His reflections reveal a man who knew pain, but chose to continue, for he understood that the pain of isolation was preferable to the mediocrity of adaptation. He saw the social world as a stage of masks, marriages, conventions, convenient friendships, all distractions to avoid facing the absurd and terrifying depths of existence. Jung wanted more. He sought to unearth what lay hidden beneath centuries of illusion, and for that, he needed silence. Solitude is that necessary silence. Without it, you repeat what you hear, react to what others expect. You live as a reflection, not as an authentic being. But there is a point most ignore. Solitude is not the same as suffering. True solitude is different from the bitter sensation of being left behind. It is not rejection. It is a choice. It is the sacred space where thought matures, where consciousness reorganizes, where inner chaos finds form, direction, and fire. Jung often reminded us that one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious, and such darkness does not surface in romantic dinners or weekends at the mall. It reveals itself only when you are completely alone, without distractions, without promises, without someone to rescue you from your own feelings. There is where true philosophical thought is born, and at the same time where many surrender, because solitude demands an emotional structure the modern world does not teach. We live in a society that rewards constant connection, oversharing, and the exposure of intimacy. Never have we been so surrounded, yet never have we been so empty. Silence terrifies because it forces you to listen to what you have been avoiding for years. Jung did not believe everyone was ready for this. He saw the philosopher, the creator, the solitary artist as the exception, a deviation, a mutation. Most do not want freedom, they want direction, someone to tell them what to do, what to feel, who to love, how to live. Real freedom is unbearable for those unprepared. That is why, when you begin to distance yourself, people judge. They say you have changed, that you are strange, that you need someone. They do not understand that you are not seeking someone. You are seeking depth, truth, silence, and the sound of your own thoughts until they finally shout something worth following. Freedom demands renunciation. You renounce the emotional comfort of someone waiting for you. You renounce the shared life plan. You renounce automatic affection. But in that renunciation, something else is revealed. Power. You become dangerous, unpredictable, untamable. Nothing can be used against you. You do not depend. You do not bend. You do not need to belong. Jung too was called mad, misunderstood by many, rejected by some. But he remained faithful to his own path. He did not live to please. He lived to tear veils, to disturb the peace of those sleeping under inherited lies. Such a life does not fit into traditional molds, nor into relationships shaped by emotional contracts. Total freedom demands that you be willing to cross deserts without company, without a map, without the promise of salvation. That is why Jung did not romanticize solitude. He saw it as a tool, a weapon, a method of purification. You begin to understand who you really are when you no longer have anyone to please, when you do not need to explain your steps, justify your decisions, or measure your words to preserve another's balance. In that wild space, you discover a brutal truth. Freedom costs you everything that kept you comfortable, but that is the price of becoming whole, rather than a softened version of yourself. Marriage is sold as the ultimate fulfillment of adult life, a happy ending, the final conquest, the trophy-marking entry into the world of the complete. But behind the smiles in the photos and the romantic captions lies another truth, denser, rawer, and rarely spoken aloud. For many, marriage is not a celebration, but containment, the end of the journey of discovery, the closing of possibilities, the interruption of expansion. Jung saw this clearly. Traditional marriage demands predictability, feeding on repetition, habit, routine, and comfort. But the creative soul needs the opposite: chaos, silence, discomfort. Nothing grand is born in controlled soil. Stability may be excellent for building homes, but fatal for birthing ideas. Think of a man with a mission, a vision, an inner calling that gives him no rest. That man needs time, focus, and undivided energy. Now imagine that same man married, bound to daily demands, emotional obligations, and endless negotiations over trivialities. The invisible cost is high. Every decision must be approved, every step explained, every change negotiated, and the creative spark begins to fade, not abruptly, but slowly. Marriage turns existential urgency into shared schedules. It replaces restlessness with consensus, deep truth with the silent agreement not to disturb the peace. At that point, many men give themselves up, trading their vocation for domestic harmony, smiling while knowing that something essential was left behind. Jung would say it is the will to self-realization that dies, the vital energy that drives creation, rupture, and transcendence, now domesticated by the desire to please. Traditional marriage demands a constant performance, being emotionally available, filtering what is said, what is felt, what is dreamed, becoming half of a project, half of a home, half of a story. But Jung did not believe in halves. He believed in wholeness, in the individual who chooses to be entire, even at the cost of losing the world's approval. For the one born to create, such renunciation is a sentence. Great ideas require solitude, mental space, and a mind undivided between creative attention and the worry over Saturday dinner plans. The golden cage is comfortable, beautiful, and safe, but it is still a cage. Those who dare to create something greater than themselves cannot live behind bars, even if they are decorated with affection. Jung knew this because he lived it. His writings were not born in cozy afternoons with a spouse by his side. They were born in solitary mountains, in silent days, in nights of fever and delirium. It was there, in isolation, that he produced ideas which still unsettle the world today. Now ask yourself, how many ideas have you abandoned to keep peace with someone? How many projects have you stored away because they did not fit the dynamics of a relationship? How many truths have you silenced to preserve comfort? Modern marriage, even when promising companionship, often demands shaping oneself into something manageable. And for a restless mind, that is the beginning of symbolic death. The price is high, but silent. You don't feel it at once. It creeps in slowly when you avoid a subject, when you postpone a plan, when you choose silence over attention, and you call it love. But it is not love. It is fear. Fear of losing the little you have built. Fear of rejection. Fear of facing the world alone. Jung did not seek companions. He sought thinkers, individuals willing to lose themselves, deconstruct themselves, bleed intellectually until they discovered a new way of being. For that, one must be free. Free from the fear of disturbing others, free from the obligation to smooth one's edges, free from the need to always have someone beside you. Marriage, as it is structured today, suffocates that freedom. It is an emotional contract with invisible clauses, clauses that demand silence, accommodation, and the postponement of dreams in the name of stability. But who said stability is a virtue? Jung would provoke, what if instability is precisely what moves the soul? What if living intensely, even in solitude, is more honest than smiling beside someone who does not understand your depth? Here is where many retreat, preferring to adapt, to stay, to give themselves up. But some choose to walk away, the path without applause, the quiet room, the night walk with their own shadow. And in that choice, something is born. Not comfortable peace, but the wild integrity of one who needs no explanation. Marriage can be beautiful, but for certain individuals, it is too beautiful not to be dangerous. And when greatness is at stake, the beauty of the cage does not outweigh the price of freedom. The mind needs space to be dangerous, but almost no one talks about this. They speak of thinking outside the box, of creating, of innovating. But they don't say that such a process demands something few can bear, being alone. Solitude, when faced with awareness, turns the mind into a weapon, not of destruction, but of revelation. When you are alone, no one dictates the rhythm of your thought. There are no external expectations, no foreign emotions to consider, no demand to moderate the intensity of what you feel or conceive. It is you, your mind, and the abyss between what is and what could be. Jung understood this with almost brutal clarity. The absence of bonds was not a lack of love. It was a tactic, a method for purifying thought, a way to prevent ideas from becoming concessions. Relationships, no matter how affectionate, generate noise, interference, too many opinions, too many emotions. All that emotional density is a constant invitation to moderation, to softening, to self-editing. But radical thought, the kind that truly moves the world, does not arise in places where you must ask permission to exist. It is born in silence, in hours when no one watches, in moments when you owe no explanation. Living alone, the mind begins to breathe differently, expanding, testing absurd ideas, forging connections that would be censored if spoken aloud. It can be inappropriate, exaggerated, scandalous, and precisely there lies its power. Einstein did not formulate his theories around family tables. Tesla did not create the foundations of modern electricity while smoothing over marital disagreements. Camus did not face the absurd of existence, wondering if his partner approved. These men isolated themselves not out of arrogance, but necessity, for they knew that certain ideas require a protected psychic womb, an environment without noise, without emotional interference, without the constant surveillance of expectation. The liberated creative mind is unpredictable, unsettling, transgressive, and such activity rarely fits into ordinary relationships. Imagine interrupting a deep, intricate line of thought just to resolve a domestic misunderstanding, calm an insecurity, or explain why you didn't reply to a message. It seems minor, but it is corrosive. The mind loses its thread, the thought dissipates, the creative energy scatters, and the idea that was about to be born dies. Few notice how often that cycle repeats in marriages, courtships, and well-intentioned relationships. Carl Jung would call it a slow poison, the constant dilution of the will. And the most tragic part is that it feels normal. Most accept that intellectual mediocrity as the price of love, as part of the deal. But the solitary creator does not accept it. He chooses something else. He chooses to awaken when he wishes, to think until the mind burns, to write without a clock, to destroy what he created the day before, and start again, all without having to justify his madness to anyone. The absence of bonds in this context is fertility, space, fire that never dies because no one demands it be moderated. Of course, it has a cost. There will be no one waiting in the living room, no couples' dinners or Sunday meals. You will be seen as strange, eccentric, cold. But in return, you gain something no one can give you: the freedom to think as far as your soul can go. Jung did not see this as a sacrifice, but as a mission, the task of thinking the unthinkable, feeling the unbearable, walking to the edge of the human and returning with something new. That task demands a free mind, and a free mind needs a life unbound by the need for external validation. It is not about hating love. It is about understanding that certain bonds, however beautiful they seem, suffocate the flame you most need to keep alive. You have already felt it. You have already had an idea you had to postpone because someone needed you in that moment. You have already interrupted intense writing because there was a pending conversation, a discomfort to resolve, an emotion to manage, and no one forced you. But you went, and in that moment, you lost something. You lost a piece of yourself. The solitary creator learns to protect that, as a monk protects his temple, because he knows greatness is subtle. It does not shout, it does not insist. It appears in unexpected moments, and if you are not ready, it leaves. The free mind is wild. It needs to run alone, needs open fields, needs sleepless nights and slow mornings. It does not fit in shared schedules or in apartments built for two. It wants to overflow, to burn, to destroy, and rebuild. And above all, it wants silence, because only in silence does chaos find form, and only in solitude does thought become truth. There comes a moment when you must decide whose life is yours, not in theory, but in practice, because most claim to be free, but live as employees of others' expectations. They say they choose for themselves, yet every step is filtered through fear of judgment, rejection, and loneliness. Choosing yourself is more than an act of courage. It is an act of war, a silent declaration that you will no longer negotiate your integrity. Jung knew that such a choice comes with a price, because the moment you decide to make yourself the center of your existence, everything that orbited out of convenience begins to destabilize. People drift away, plans collapse, relationships break. But what remains is you, bare, free, and finally whole. Most do not want that kind of freedom. They want the edited version, the freedom with a manual, with guaranteed affection, with a comforting soundtrack. But real freedom is brutal, empty, dangerous. It does not come with applause. It comes with silence and with total responsibility for every choice. True sovereignty is not about ruling others. It is about not being ruled by anyone, not by culture, not by lack, not by fear. You know you are on that path when you stop asking whether people agree with your decisions, when you start living without asking permission, when you say no, and you feel no guilt when you choose to walk alone, even if everyone says you are wrong. That choice frightens and isolates, but it also liberates, because you begin to realize something no one told you. The life you truly want does not fit into the molds you were offered. And to live it, you will have to betray expectations, disappoint, and let down those who projected a version of you that never existed. This is where many give up. They return to lukewarm relationships, predictable jobs, plans that disturb no one. They call it peace, but deep down they know it is surrender. Jung would say, "Become who you are," but no one teaches you how, because to be who you truly are means letting go of the safety of being who others approve of. It means placing yourself at the center of your life without fearing being called selfish. Selfishness is not thinking of yourself. It is demanding that others think for you. The person who chooses themselves stops delegating, no longer blames others for their unhappiness. They do not wait to be saved. They do not need to be understood to keep moving forward. They are enough for themselves. And that scares people, because one who is enough for themselves does not bend. They do not need to please to belong. They do not need to agree to keep affection. They do not need to hide their intensity to fit in. That person is dangerous because they are free. And in a world built on emotional dependencies, a free person is a threat. Choosing yourself is like leaping from a cliff without knowing if there is ground below. And yet you leap, not from impulse, but from awareness, from knowing that staying where you are is dying in life, accepting emotional scraps in exchange for company, selling your soul for safety. And that is not life. It is survival disguised as routine. Jung never asked you to be happy. He asked you to be whole, even if that means losing everything that now gives you comfort. Because only when you lose everything that kept you safe do you discover who you truly are. Solitude at that level ceases to be absence. It becomes fertile ground, the space where your will grows, where your vision takes form, and where your existence finally finds its justification. The one who chooses themselves does not need to be understood. They need only be faithful to one thing: their own truth, even if it costs them the love of others, even if it turns the world against them. Because in the end, they know the greatest act of love is not to abandon oneself. So, you made it this far, and now you know what that means. It means that, at some level, you already knew that the life they sold you with rings, promises, and emotional stability is not for you. Maybe you tried, maybe you are still trying, but something inside remains restless, keeps whispering that there is something more. And there is. But that more is not in finding someone. It is in becoming someone. Someone who does not need approval to breathe. Someone who can be alone without collapsing. Someone who builds an existence not to be accepted, but to be true. Jung said that one who has a why can endure almost any how, but that why you only find when you silence the world around you. And that demands courage, detachment, losing the comforts that kept your soul asleep. The world is not interested in your freedom. It is interested in your adaptation. But there comes a point when adapting is the same as dying, only in slow motion. Now you have two options: return to normality and pretend this video never shook you, or take the risk. The risk of living as one who owes nothing to anyone, as one who carries in their chest the only loyalty that matters, the loyalty of never betraying oneself. I had to be alone for a long time to understand this. And it was not one of those functional singlenesses with lively nights and apps installed. It was not that kind of solitude. It was the kind that silences everything around you. I remember one night in particular. It was raining. I was sitting on the floor, leaning against the cold wall of my room, not out of drama, but exhaustion. And for the first time, I did not want anyone. I did not want someone to talk to, nor someone to come and save me. I wanted to listen to myself, to understand myself, to rebuild myself. And there, in that almost primitive state of presence, I realized I was whole, hurt but whole, alone but free, afraid but honest. And that was when everything began to make sense. If this video reached you in some way, it was not by chance. Life does not send this kind of message to those still asleep. It whispers it to those who have already begun to awaken. And that was when everything began to make sense. If this video reached you in some way, it was not by chance. Life does not send this kind of message to those still asleep. It whispers it to those who have already begun to awaken. If you felt these words resonate with you, I invite you to subscribe and activate the notification bell so you don't miss the next step in your own journey of self-discovery. Because in the end, the greatest act of love is to never abandon yourself.